Right now, your brain is lying to you and you don't even know it. Before you decide, before you think, before you choose, your nervous system has already said yes, and once you see how that yes is engineered, you'll never be controlled the same way again. If this is making you uncomfortable, that's good. It means awareness is turning back on. Pause for a second, take a breath. And if you want to understand how influence actually works, stay with me. Compliance is rarely logical because the brain is not built to negotiate reality in calm, rational steps. It is built to survive. When a message reaches you, it first passes through emotional filters that ask one question: is this safe or dangerous? If safety is implied, the brain relaxes standards. If danger is suggested, it seeks the fastest exit. Logic comes later, if at all. This is why people agree to things they later cannot explain. The decision was made before conscious thought arrived. Automatic compliance is driven by pattern recognition. The brain compares the present moment to stored experiences and then reacts, not analyzes. Tone of voice, facial expression, posture, confidence, and certainty are processed faster than words. When these signals match authority or familiarity, resistance drops. You feel a subtle sense of ease, and that ease is mistaken for trust. Emotion disguises itself as intuition. Stress accelerates this process. Under pressure, the brain conserves energy by relying on shortcuts. These shortcuts favor emotional relief over accuracy. Saying yes can feel like relief, agreeing can feel like peace. Compliance becomes a self-soothing act rather than a reasoned choice. The body relaxes once conflict seems resolved, reinforcing the behavior. Repetition strengthens the effect. Familiar ideas require less energy to process, and the brain interprets ease as truth. The more often something is heard, the less threatening it feels. Over time, emotional acceptance replaces evaluation. You stop asking whether something is correct and start assuming it is normal. This is why manipulation works best when it feels natural. Nothing dramatic happens, no alarm sounds. The brain quietly shifts into automatic mode, following emotional signals that promise safety, certainty, or belonging, while logic waits in the background, unaware that the decision has already been made through conditioning, learned early, reinforced socially, daily, quietly, persistently, beneath awareness, shaping preferences, reactions, compliance, reflexes. The brain does not search for truth as a primary objective. It searches for stability. From an evolutionary perspective, being right mattered far less than being safe. A false belief that keeps you alive is more valuable to the nervous system than an accurate belief that increases risk. This is why safety, certainty, and belonging dominate decision-making long before logic is allowed to participate. Safety is processed first. The brain constantly scans for threat, rejection, or instability. When a message signals protection, confidence, or reduced risk, it is welcomed without scrutiny. When a message threatens isolation or danger, it is resisted regardless of accuracy. Truth becomes secondary to survival comfort. The brain asks, will this keep me safe? Not, is this correct? Certainty comes next. Uncertainty consumes energy. The brain experiences ambiguity as stress, so it gravitates toward explanations that feel complete, simple, and confident. A clear answer, even a wrong one, feels better than doubt. This is why confident statements override nuanced truth. Certainty reduces anxiety, and anxiety reduction is interpreted as correctness. Belonging completes the loop. Humans are wired for connection, and social exclusion registers in the brain similarly to physical pain. Agreement maintains group harmony. Disagreement risks rejection. When an idea aligns with group norms, shared language, or identity, the brain rewards acceptance with emotional relief. Truth that threatens belonging is filtered out, minimized, or reinterpreted. This hierarchy explains why people defend false beliefs with intensity. They are not protecting an idea. They are protecting safety, identity, and connection. Logical counterarguments feel like threats because they destabilize emotional anchors. The brain responds defensively, not intellectually. Once safety is assured, certainty is offered, and belonging is implied, the mind relaxes its guard. Critical thinking quiets. acceptance feels natural. The belief is absorbed not because it was examined, but because it satisfied deeper neurological priorities shaped by evolution, reinforced socially, rewarded emotionally, maintained unconsciously, guiding perception, loyalty, agreement, and compliance. Stress fundamentally alters how the brain processes information. When pressure enters the system, the nervous system shifts from exploration to survival. The brain reallocates resources away from reflection and toward rapid response. This shift narrows perception, limits options, and simplifies reality. Complexity becomes intolerable. The mind seeks the fastest path to relief rather than the most accurate understanding. Under stress, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoning and evaluation, reduces activity. At the same time, emotional and threat detection systems become dominant. This creates a tunnel effect. The brain fixates on whatever promises safety, escape, or resolution. Alternative perspectives fade into the background, not because they are invalid, but because they require energy the brain is unwilling to spend. Suggestion becomes powerful in this state. When someone presents a clear direction, confident instruction, or decisive solution, the stressed brain experiences immediate relief. That relief is chemically rewarding. It signals that the threat is being managed. As a result, the suggestion is accepted with minimal resistance. The brain mistakes emotional relief for correctness. Time pressure intensifies this effect. Urgency removes the illusion of choice. When decisions must be made quickly, the brain defaults to external guidance. Whoever appears calm, certain, or authoritative becomes a temporary anchor. The mind borrows their certainty to regulate its own discomfort. Stress also reduces memory access. Past lessons, warnings, and contradictory evidence are harder to retrieve. This creates a present-focused mindset where only immediate cues matter. Words like now, quickly, last chance, and fix activate compliance by framing delay as danger. In this narrowed state, the brain stops asking why and starts asking how. How do I end this discomfort? How do I comply efficiently? How do I restore balance? Suggestion answers those questions without demanding analysis. Once stress subsides, awareness often returns, followed by confusion or regret. The individual may struggle to explain their own behavior, not realizing that stress temporarily rewired perception, decision-making, and judgment, prioritizing survival comfort over autonomy, clarity, and conscious choice. Authority cues have a unique ability to bypass critical thinking because the brain is conditioned to associate authority with survival and order. From early childhood, authority figures provide protection, structure, and access to resources. Over time, the nervous system learns that obedience reduces conflict and increases safety. This learning becomes automatic and operates beneath conscious awareness. When the brain detects authority signals, it shifts responsibility outward. Confidence, status markers, uniforms, credentials, calm certainty, and decisive language all trigger this response. The mind assumes that someone else has already done the thinking. This assumption conserves energy and reduces anxiety. Questioning authority requires effort and risk, while compliance feels efficient and safe. Authority also creates asymmetry. The brain subconsciously places the authority figure higher in the hierarchy and itself lower. In this position, disagreement feels inappropriate or dangerous. Even mild authority can suppress doubt. The tone matters more than the content. A confident delivery can make weak information feel strong, while hesitation can undermine accurate facts. Social reinforcement amplifies the effect. When others defer to authority, the brain interprets consensus as validation. This activates conformity mechanisms, making independent judgment feel unnecessary. The individual experiences alignment rather than evaluation. Agreement feels like belonging, and belonging feels like safety. Stress magnifies authority influence. In uncertain or threatening situations, the brain actively seeks leadership. A clear directive provides psychological relief. The authority figure becomes a stabilizing reference point, and following instructions restores a sense of order. This reduces internal tension, reinforcing obedience. The most powerful aspect of authority is that it feels internal. Compliance is experienced as common sense rather than submission. The brain reframes obedience as rational choice, protecting self-image and autonomy. People often say it just made sense at the time. Because authority cues operate automatically, they can override personal values, logic, and even direct evidence. The brain prioritizes hierarchy stability over independent reasoning, especially when certainty is offered with confidence, repetition, and social approval, shaping agreement, behavior, and compliance without conscious resistance. Repetition alters perception by changing how the brain experiences effort. When an idea is encountered for the first time, it requires energy to process. The brain evaluates unfamiliar information cautiously because uncertainty demands attention. With repetition, processing becomes easier. This ease is interpreted as familiarity, and familiarity is subconsciously associated with safety. The brain does not label this shift as comfort, it labels it as truth. Each repeated exposure lowers resistance. The nervous system stops treating the idea as a potential threat and begins to accept it as part of the environment. Once something feels normal, it stops being questioned. The brain assumes that what is common must also be correct. This assumption is efficient, not accurate, but efficiency is prioritized. Familiarity also reduces emotional friction. Repeated messages feel smoother, less jarring, and less disruptive. The absence of discomfort is misread as validity. The brain equates calm with correctness, even when no evidence has changed. Over time, the idea no longer feels external, it feels self-generated. Repetition works even when the content is known to be weak. The brain is not tracking accuracy in the background, it is tracking exposure. Each encounter strengthens neural pathways associated with recognition. Eventually, the idea activates automatically, bypassing evaluation entirely. This is why slogans, phrases, and simplified narratives spread so easily. Context strengthens the effect. When repetition occurs across different environments or sources, the brain interprets this as independent confirmation. It assumes that if many voices repeat the same message, it must be grounded in reality. The source becomes irrelevant. The pattern becomes the proof. Memory also plays a role. Familiar information is easier to recall, and ease of recall feels like importance. The brain trusts what comes to mind quickly. Slow retrieval feels uncertain. As a result, repeated ideas dominate thought, even when better information exists. This process is subtle and cumulative. No single exposure changes belief. Instead, repetition slowly replaces evaluation with recognition. The idea stops feeling like something you heard and starts feeling like something you know, shaping perception, judgment, confidence, and compliance without deliberate choice. Microagreements work because the brain is wired to protect consistency. Once you agree to something small, the mind quietly updates its internal story about who you are and what you support. That story then guides future behavior. The initial agreement may feel insignificant, but it sets a psychological direction. The brain prefers alignment over contradiction, so it continues moving the same way. Each small yes reduces internal friction. Saying no requires justification and emotional effort. Saying yes feels cooperative and smooth. The brain rewards this smoothness with relief. That relief reinforces the behavior, making the next agreement easier than the last. Resistance erodes gradually, not through pressure, but through comfort. Microagreements also lower alertness. When a request is framed as harmless or obvious, the brain does not activate defensive systems. It assumes no threat is present. A nod, a smile, a shared opinion, or a simple confirmation feels socially safe. These moments build momentum. The brain tracks them as proof of alignment. Once alignment is established, larger requests are interpreted differently. The mind no longer evaluates them independently. Instead, it compares them to prior behavior. Rejecting a bigger request would require admitting inconsistency. Inconsistency feels uncomfortable and destabilizing. To avoid that discomfort, the brain justifies compliance. This effect is amplified socially. Public agreements carry more weight than private ones. When others witness a small commitment, the pressure to remain consistent increases. Identity becomes involved. The brain shifts from deciding what is right to protecting how it is seen. Microagreements also bypass logic by operating emotionally. They appeal to politeness, cooperation, and shared values. The brain associates agreement with being reasonable and likable. Disagreement begins to feel unnecessary or rude. Over time, boundaries blur. By the time the major request appears, the decision feels pre-made. The brain experiences compliance as a continuation, not a choice. What began as a simple yes quietly reshapes behavior, preference, and self-perception, guiding action through consistency, comfort, identity, and momentum rather than conscious evaluation. Fear and reward operate faster than reason because they are processed in older, more primitive parts of the brain. These systems evolved to ensure survival long before logic and language existed. When fear or reward is detected, the brain does not pause to analyze. It reacts. This reaction happens in milliseconds, long before conscious thought has a chance to intervene. Fear narrows attention and prioritizes escape or protection. When a threat is perceived, whether real or suggested, the brain treats it as urgent. Accuracy becomes secondary. The goal is to reduce danger as quickly as possible. Messages framed around loss, risk, or consequence trigger this response automatically. The brain becomes motivated to comply if compliance promises relief. Reward works in a similar way, but from the opposite direction. The promise of gain, approval, pleasure, or status activates motivation circuits. These circuits create anticipation, which feels good. That positive feeling pulls behavior forward without requiring justification. The brain moves toward what feels rewarding before evaluating whether it is wise. Both fear and reward compress time. They create a sense of now. Delayed thinking feels risky. Immediate action feels correct. This is why offers with urgency or threats with deadlines are so effective. They trap the brain in the present moment, where impulse dominates reasoning. Reasoning systems require calm and space to function properly. Fear and reward remove both. Under their influence, the brain simplifies choices into binary options: act or suffer, comply or miss out. Nuance disappears. Complexity feels like danger. Repeated exposure strengthens this pathway. The brain learns that quick reactions reduce discomfort or increase pleasure. Over time, it defaults to these patterns automatically. Behavior becomes conditioned rather than chosen. What makes this mechanism powerful is that it feels natural. People believe they are deciding freely, unaware that emotional systems have already set the direction. Logic arrives later, not to decide but to justify what fear or reward already initiated, shaping behavior, preference, compliance, and belief through emotional acceleration rather than conscious control. Awareness disrupts manipulation by reactivating choice. When influence operates unnoticed, the brain runs on automatic patterns learned through emotion, repetition, and social conditioning. The moment those patterns are observed, they lose efficiency. Attention creates distance between stimulus and response, and in that space, autonomy returns. Becoming aware slows the nervous system. Instead of reacting, the brain begins to notice internal signals, tension, urgency, excitement, or fear. These sensations are often mistaken for intuition, but awareness reframes them as data. Once emotional reactions are identified, they no longer dictate behavior automatically. The brain regains access to reasoning systems that were previously bypassed. Awareness also restores context. Manipulation works by narrowing focus and simplifying choices. When awareness expands perception, more options become visible. Questions reappear. Why is this urgent? Who benefits? What happens if I wait? These questions interrupt momentum and break the illusion that compliance is the only path. Language plays a critical role. Naming a tactic weakens its power. When the brain labels pressure, authority cues, repetition, or fear-based framing, those signals are reclassified from guidance to influence attempts. This reclassification changes how they are processed. The mind shifts from absorption to evaluation. Choice is not about resistance, it is about clarity. Awareness does not require opposition, it requires presence. Simply noticing a pull to agree or act creates friction in automatic systems. That friction is enough to slow the process and re-engage conscious decision-making. Over time, awareness rewires responses. The brain learns that it can tolerate discomfort without immediate action. Urgency loses its grip. Certainty becomes less seductive. Familiarity no longer substitutes for truth. This retraining strengthens autonomy and reduces susceptibility to external control. When awareness is practiced consistently, influence becomes visible rather than invisible. Manipulation relies on speed and unconscious compliance. Awareness removes speed and restores agency, allowing decisions to emerge from understanding rather than reaction. Grounded in clarity, self-trust, and deliberate choice,